Hello and welcome to the review for the Safari Ltd 2019 Stegosaurus. As always, if you would like to purchase this or any Safari figure, you can do so at safariltd.com or at amazon.com/safariltd, and I think the coupon code BIONIC, B-I-O-N-I-C, should still work. As far as I know, it's still functional, so if you've never used it, I don't think you can use it multiple times, but if you haven't used it up until now, that's still an option, as far as I know. So, my lamp is kind of rattling. My lamp is falling apart. It's just losing pieces every once in a while, and it's great. Don't worry about it. So anyway, getting into the figure, the first real major note with this figure is the anatomical work. In terms of accuracy, in terms of how the body of Stegosaurus has been restored, this figure just does a fantastic job. It is, as far as I know, the only, mass-produced, mass-available Stegosaurus model on the market right now that is actually based off of the Sophie specimen, which is the relatively new Stegosaurus specimen that was discovered last year, 2 years ago now. I'm not sure exactly when the paper and everything was published or when it was originally dug up, but it's basically the most remarkably well-preserved Stegosaurus specimen we have, and it kind of turned around our view of the overall body shape and the proportions of the animal. It actually made it make a lot more taxonomic sense. It looks a lot more like its typical relatives and their body sort of shapes and proportions and everything. So, really, really cool. I recommend you go check it out. The paper and everything is public access. I'll probably put a link down below if I remember to do it. I don't know. It has a 3D PDF. Apparently that exists. And in terms of restoring the animal based on that specimen specifically, there's nothing to say about this figure, because it does everything pretty much perfectly. The only small inconsistency that people have really pointed out is that the height of the plates on the neck is probably a bit high. They're very sort of thin, tall little structures. But if there's one thing I noticed looking at the actual skeleton, it's that the plates on the neck were a little bit closer to this sort of shape than I was expecting, and they were keratinous, so I think the figure can kind of get away with it. But that's one nitpick to bring up. So as far as accuracy, that's it. I wish I had more to say, but this is one of those cases where a figure does so well at something, there's just nothing to talk about. So, in terms of coloration, it's one of my favorite aspects of this figure's design. It's not green with red plates. Oh my goodness! Safari already has one older Stegosaurus figure that we'll see later that deviates from the typical Stegosaurus color scheme, but this deviates in an even more attractive, interesting way, I think. It's not super bright. It reminds me of, say, the Triceratops figure from last year, where it's not super vivid or super eye-catching with the colors, but they're interesting enough that they're still attractive and somewhat eye-catching. It's a good blend of oh, that looks really nice, but it's also believable. It looks like it could be the colors on the body of this huge herbivore. We basically just have a really nice subtle blending of all sorts of different browns and tans, just lovely, rich, simple earth tones, lots of nice little warm sort of oranges and things in there. Just looks fantastic in my opinion, and it's all capped off with these lovely orange plates with these subtle little markings coming in from the side. I just love the way it's all been done. It just looks really attractive to me. There was an interesting late production stage sort of alteration to this figure. If you look at the old original stock photo, if you can find it, it was way more kind of light and pastel-like in its coloration. It was sort of a little desaturated and a little brightened, and they basically saturated it and darkened it, and I think it looks a lot better. I know there were some actual complaints, which I think is why they slightly altered it. It's basically the same colors, just with kind of a different filter put over them, for lack of a better term that actually refers to things you can do in real life and not on a computer program. But anyhow, it was absolutely worth it. They don't do late-stage production changes with Safari stuff very often, but they delayed this and the Allosaurus. I think with the Allosaurus, it was an adjustment with the pose, so it would be more stable. And with this, seeing the coloration just, again, be darkened, made a little richer, a little more vivid. I just love what they did with it. I'm glad that they made that decision. The final note with colors is it does have mud on its feet, question mark? Yeah, you can see this gray, very sloppily just stuck on the feet. It definitely looks like it's supposed to be mud. You can see on this back foot this kind of drastic cutoff from the gray on the front and then no gray on the back. I think it's supposed to look like it actually walked through mud, which is a fun detail. If it was just meant to be coloration, then I'd be a little more iffy on the application of the paint, but I think for what it appears to be trying to achieve, I think it does a good job, and I actually like that. And I know some people are bothered by those, the mud socks, for lack of a better term, but in person I can say that they are way less obtrusive than even I was anticipating, and they didn't really bother me, but having it in person, you really don't notice them very much at all. The detail work on this figure was one thing that I know some people were kind of skeptical of. A lot of people just said the figure looked really smooth and undetailed. Well, first of all, I'll say that not every figure needs crazy, crisp, super visible detail, and subtle texturing is really underappreciated, I think. And this figure is kind of the epitome of that, because it does have scalation. The scalation doesn't cover the whole body super consistently, but as you can see, there are little scales and tons of little lines and wrinkles. The texture on this figure is wonderful. It's just very subtle, very, very fine, small little stamps for scales. The only reasonably large scales are the scales along the throat, and Stegosaurus has very prominent protective throat armor. We have direct soft tissue preservation of that, or perhaps impressions, one of the two, and so that's been captured very accurately. And overall, yeah, the figure is not smooth, and I love how the texture has been done. I think the effect it has in person is just wonderful. The figure does not look smooth, it does not look undetailed. It looks wonderful, and in fact, even the camera isn't quite picking up all the little details of it. It's just been done with a lot of care, and I can see how some people would still prefer the larger, more visible, crisp sort of scalation, the true individual scale sculpting style that we get on some ceratopsians, but I think for the, probable integument of a stegosaur, I think this works better, and just visually, it's really well done. In terms of, paint application with detail, the mouth, nostril, the eyes all look great. The eyes on this figure are really well painted. Safari's eyes have been getting better. They've been kind of, on occasion a little flat, a little lifeless in the past, but I think for this year and for some of the figures I've gotten for next year, because we have a few early 2020 figures from Safari in already that we'll be reviewing soon, the eyes are painted just really wonderfully, especially for how small they are on the actual model, and all the other little things like toenails and plates and spikes and anything else you could be worried about. It's all really, really well produced. The final thing to talk about, I guess, is just the overall shape of the animal, the posture, the silhouette. And I love the way this figure looks. Just the overall sort of shape and pose and the impact that the figure has standing there. I love it. It's not super exciting. It's not super eye-catching. They could have made it much more dramatic with its Thagomizer swinging through the air at something. It's sort of lazily swinging to the side. It's not really walking, it's really just kind of standing there, but I just really like it for some reason. It's really subtle and naturalistic. It just looks like an animal kind of chilling in its environment, ready at any moment to defend itself, but not necessarily in the act of dramatically, intensely taking down a carnivore that's attacking out of the trees. It's really nice. It kind of exemplifies Safari's style of making figures that feel really naturalistic, that feel like animals, that don't feel exaggerated just for sort of effect. So I really like it. I can see why some people thought this figure was boring. I get it, but for me, I just find it super attractive, and it's, I think, my favorite figure from this year. I don't have all the 2019 figures in person, but so far it's my favorite, and it's one of my favorite figures from them ever. It might be my favorite herbivore figure they've done, with the exception of just a couple sauropods that I also really love. Real quick before we go, I'm just gushing about it now, because I highly recommend this one. I think it's a hugely underappreciated model with so much going for it. I'm going to bring in a couple older Safari Stegosaurs. I'm going to take us back in time through the years of production with the company. I gotta look at the year on the bottom of it, actually. 2007, that's actually a lot older than I thought this was. So well over a decade ago, they produced this Stegosaurus, which I really like. It deviates from the stereotypic color scheme, and it's a very attractive Stegosaurus, but it's a bit outdated now, and it doesn't really work with their modern style. The way their current lineup is looking, it's pretty small compared to what they're doing now. It's a good model, but it's great to see an update of it. And going even further back in time to the Carnegie Collection, I have this was a final generation Carnegie Stegosaurus. This is the paint scheme and sculpt that they had going for the very last run of the Safari Stegosaurs before they were discontinued a few years later when all of Carnegie was ended. when they sort of separated from the museum and everything, and were no longer partnered with them. I still love this figure. I have a soft spot for it, but as you can see, they truly have improved a lot over the years. That is about it. Again, SafariLTD.com, coupon code BIONIC. If you want to go to the Amazon, that's amazon.com/SafariLTD. All that stuff. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time.